So a few years ago, I was an average SSL or like 2K player on keyboard and mouse. I'd just been chatting to my coach at the time about the pros and cons of KBM and controller, and a thought sparked into my mind. Is KBM holding me back? Should I switch over to controller? I'd seen how many pros were on controller and how barely any top pros were using keyboard at the time. I think it was only Yukio and Trufinio when I was looking at it. And the ones who were using keyboard were slowly fizzling out of the esport, left behind by their more mechanical peers. Sure, you could disregard it as them just not putting in the same amount of effort as everyone on controller. But when every single keyboard and mouse pro started getting erased from the esport, you can't help but recognize the one thing they all had in common: their choice of input. But I was already SSL. How much time would I have had to spend just to make it back to where I was? Was it even worth it to make the switch? Well, my coach just said, if I wanted to make it pro, then I should probably consider switching. It stuck with me, and a little while later, I decided that I would take a leap of faith and switch. As far as I knew, there wasn't anyone that had made it as high rank as me on keyboard and then made a switch, so this was pretty out of left field. After all, why should I switch when I've already poured in so many hours into getting this good? But this wasn't just about Rocket League for me. I wanted to prove to myself that I could make it all the way back from scratch. I also thought it would just be a fun challenge. But I wouldn't only learn a bunch of things in Rocket League. This switch would even teach me a bunch of life lessons that have stuck with me ever since. Lesson number 1, the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you're not familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, it essentially boils down to this. The more incompetent you are, the more likely you are to overestimate your abilities. And as you progress in ability, you start to lose faith in your abilities. Only when you start to become more experienced do you regain that confidence. Well, the first few days on controller were actually better than I had expected. I'd never actually even touched a controller prior to this. The only experience I had playing on a controller was using my PS Vita and Nintendo 3DS. When I had to choose my binds, I decided to use Cash's binds, and when I had to choose settings, I decided to go for Joyos, as they seemed pretty optimal and were quite easy to get used to. I also just idolized these players, so I wanted to get good as them. I wasn't perfect, and I was expecting to play on the level of like a plat, but instead my mechanics were more on the level of a champ, maybe even GC. I guess being an SSL helped transfer even my mechanics, and not just my game sense. Most of the days were spent grinding free play and custom training to help me get used to controlling the car with a controller. It was quite hard to adjust to, and every single mistake I made just made the temptation to switch back to KBM that more tempting. This is stupid, I'm wasting my time. That's what I thought. Fast forward about a month, and I actually got SSL on controller for the first time. But didn't I just say that I was struggling like crazy? What? Well, yeah, but I somehow got used to it quite quickly and ended up getting SSL. I still felt like a fraud though. My mechanics were nowhere near as good as what I was on KBM, but it was slowly getting there. The biggest drawback for me was no longer being able to stall or speed flip consistently. Stalling was out of the window entirely. On KBM it was a lot easier. You just hold down Q and D or A and E and then just jump. That's about it. On controller you have to pull the stick perfectly to the left and then hold arrow right, or do the opposite and then jump. Super hard. And even though I just reached the rank I was previously at, I still felt like I had a long road ahead. Lesson 2. Time is everything. After that initial success of getting SSL, progress slowed heavily. I made an absolute banger of a montage to conclude the year, but my mechanical skill was still lacking. The thing is, muscle memory of the level I was at takes a really long time to build. That and the fact that I was slacking on ranked. I was never much of a ranked grinder. I much preferred sitting hours alone in free play listening to music. This worked to my advantage though, as free play has one big advantage over just playing ranked. You have the ball 100% of the time. Sounds obvious, but that means that I was only training my mechanical ability without having to worry about anyone else. With this, 11 months after I decided to swap to controller, I had reached 2k MMR. That meant that I had now matched the same MMR that I was at when I was still playing on keyboard and mouse. But even then, I still felt like a fraud. I didn't feel like I had the same mechanical prowess as when I played on keyboard. However, it was too late to back out now, and I kept telling myself that I had more potential if I kept going like this. And that leads me to my final lesson. Lesson 3. Trust the process. After reaching 2K, I just kept practicing and honing my mechanics. And around this time was when I debuted in the first division of the Swedish League, and even made my way into the national championships in the winter. The next year rolls around and I passed the 2100 mark. I'd now surpassed the level I was at when I was playing on keyboard. I played a couple more LAN tournaments as well, and even managed to qualify for an international LAN in the Netherlands. And that brings us to today. I've now won quite a few LANs, surpassed the 2200 and 2300 mark, and even got top 100. Really, the only thing I haven't done is qualify to an RLCS event. All of this might have never happened if I decided to quit and switch back to keyboard all those years ago. So the question is, was it worth it? For me, I would have said yes. I believe that it was well worth it, even with all the relearning and frustration in the beginning of the switch. For anyone that is considering switching to controller from keyboard, I would recommend it if you are willing to put up with the time you will have to put in. But I don't think it's necessary. Keyboard and mouse is not bad, far from it. I think it's perfectly fine to continue with KBM and not switch to controller. You will not be held back from it. Of course, you'll give up a few things like more precise controls, but you'll also gain a few things that controllers can't do, mainly ultra consistent flips. But if your ambition is to go pro and you haven't reached SSL yet, then I can say with confidence that it is worth considering a switch to controller. What binds would I recommend switching to? I would have boost on R1, air roll and power slide on L1, and air roll left or right on L2. If you're not a fan of this one though, you can always just use boost on R1, air roll and power slide on square, and air roll left or right on L1. These are the ones I would recommend. Sensitivity and dead zone settings are less important, but I would recommend using Zens and adjusting the dead zone to your liking. The dead zone varies heavily depending on your controller. If you decide to embark on the same journey as I did, remember, it takes a hell of a lot of time and effort, so don't be discouraged if you don't play like a god after 2 weeks. Just trust the process, and you'll make it further than you ever would have thought.